Isaiah 33:22 states, "For the Lord is our judge, the Lord is our lawgiver, the Lord is our king, he will save us." God is the supreme lawmaker. One of the three governmental branches outlined in the U.S. Constitution is the judicial branch. The judicial branch was designed to be the least important branch of government. However, American thinkers and lawyers have interpreted this branch to be the most important. Article 3 of the Constitution authorizes one Supreme Court. A Supreme Court is defined as, quote, "the head of the judicial branch. It is the highest federal court in the U.S., and its opinions overrule those of all other U.S. courts. It consists of 9 justices, 1 Chief Justice, and 8 Associate Justices." End quote. The Supreme Court has been known to have acquired many cases. These cases have either helped or hurt the country. However, some of these cases are quite controversial. Dred Scott v. Sandford is ranked as one of America's top 2 to 3 controversial cases. Dred Scott was born in 1799 in Southampton County, Virginia. Scott was a slave for the majority of his life. In 1818, he moved with his owner, Peter Blow, to Alabama. 12 years later, they moved to St. Louis, Missouri. Missouri was a pro-slavery state. Another event that occurred in the same year was the death of Peter Blow. John Emerson, a doctor, purchased Dred Scott. Dr. Emerson and Scott moved to the Wisconsin Territory. The transition of slave owners remains in question, as scholars debate this matter. During this time period, Dred Scott married the love of his life, Harriet Robinson. Harriet was another slave who was owned by Dr. John Emerson. Dred and Harriet were married until Dred's death in 1857. Harriet Scott is often overlooked in the Dred Scott trial. Dr. Emerson gave Dred and Harriet some privileges compared to other slave owners. Life was all right for the Scott couple. John Emerson was also a military man. He was sent to Florida in order to serve in the Seminole War. After serving 2 years in the war, the Army sent Dr. Emerson back to Missouri. He contracted an illness and unexpectedly died in 1843. Emerson's widow, Irene, was left with all of the slaves. Dred and Harriet took this opportunity to buy their freedom. Irene refused to acknowledge the Scotts and denied their request. This enraged Dred, Harriet, and many other abolitionists. Dred Scott decided to sue one of the Missouri state courts. He believed he had the ability to purchase his freedom due to his living background. Scott lived in Illinois in the Wisconsin Territory. Both places outlawed slavery. The results of this district case were, quote, "a jury decided in his favor," end quote. Surprisingly, the case was brought back up in 1852. Sneaky Irene decided to appeal the case to the higher courts. The local courts were not going to analyze it. Rather, the Missouri Supreme Court would view the case. In a gruesome case, the Missouri Supreme Court enslaved Dred and Harriet Scott once again. This enraged the Scotts, locals, and abolitionists. The Scotts attorneys decided to take this case to the U.S. Supreme Court. Quote, "Neither Dred nor Harriet Scott could read or write, and they needed both logistical and financial support to plead their case. They received it from their church, abolitionists, and an unlikely source, the Blow family, who had once owned them," end quote. This trial in the different courts lasted for more than a decade. A common question arises about this case. Why is the name of the federal case Dred Scott v. Sandford? Irene Emerson gave her brother, John Sandford, the estate of Dr. John Emerson. This was an issue for Dred's court case because Sandford did not reside in Missouri. John Sandford lived in New York. Quote, "Sandford was not subject to suit in Missouri. Scott's lawyers filed a suit against him in U.S. District, which is a federal court," end quote. Members of the Supreme Court during this case were Chief Justice Roger B. Taney, Associate Justices John A. Campbell, John Catron, Benjamin R. Curtis, Peter V. Daniel, Robert C. Greer, John McLean, Samuel Nelson, and James M. Wayne. Dred Scott had 2 attorneys that represented him, Montgomery Blair and George Ticknor Curtis. The Supreme Court case was argued from February 11th to February 18th, 1856. At the time, Franklin Pierce was wrapping up his presidency and transferring the power over to James Buchanan. On March 6, 1857, 2 days after President James Buchanan's inauguration, the 5th U.S. Supreme Court Chief Justice, Roger B. Taney, declared the ruling on the Dred Scott v. Sanford case. Taney, born into an aristocratic family who supported slavery, said, quote, "There are 2 clauses in the Constitution which point directly and specifically to the Negro race as a separate class of persons and show clearly that they were not regarded as a portion of the people or citizens of the government then formed," end quote. His opinion, quote, which said that all people of African descent, free or enslaved, were not United States citizens and therefore had no right to sue in federal court. In addition, he wrote that the Fifth Amendment protected slave owner rights because enslaved workers were their legal property, end quote. Votes for Dred Scott to be enslaved were higher than for Scott to obtain freedom. It was a 7-2 opinion. The 7 justices who voted for enslavement were all Democrats. The 2 justices who vetoed Scott's enslavement were Republicans. The Dred Scott decision was a landmark case in that it drew a clear line of how the government stood on the issue of slavery and further inflamed passions surrounding an already divisive topic within American politics. While Southerners were ecstatic at the outcome, the massive abolitionist campaign to aid Scott led many Southerners to claim that abolitionists were anti-Southern and thus enemies of a greater union, end quote. Roger B. Taney's opinion has been noted by scholars as, quote, explicit racist dogma in the history of the Supreme Court, and was not even accurate in interpreting the founders' inconsistent views on how African Americans fit into the new national framework, end quote. The ruling of this case is one of the main contributing factors to the bloody Civil War. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments would later be created because of this court case. Court cases have been known to cause different results. Dred Scott v. Sanford is one of the most controversial United States Supreme Court cases. Taney's final opinion caused much strife and division amongst family, friends, and foes. Americans interfered with the Supreme Court because of this ruling. Quote, Dred Scott would still be a law today if the people did not interfere with the court, end quote. This court case is a prime example of the constitutionality of court interferences. Former President Abraham Lincoln once said, quote, "A house divided itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free. I do not expect the Union to be dissolved. I do not expect the house to fall. But I do expect it will cease to be divided. It will become all one thing or all the other," end quote. Thank you.
Great job. Okay, so let's give some glows to Miss Audrey.
Now I have a question for the class. Did I pronounce Roger B. Taney's last name correctly this time? I did. Okay. Thank you.
That's a glow then.
That's the one thing I'll take with.
Move this thing out of the way for some trips.
Very informative, and I learned a lot.
Yeah, the research was very